we'll start with just kind of getting into some of the background before we kind of dive into some of the unique things that are happening. So first question I got for you guys is, what's the history behind the Narrow River Preservation Association and why does it matter?
I guess I'll just jump in. We've been around since 1970. We were started by people, residents of the watershed, who were concerned about development that was proposed and also concerned about the water quality in Narrow River. So Weir Lafarge and other people got people together, a lot from the Saunderstown, North Kingstown area, and I had a meeting to talk about this. And the fact that there were some newspaper publications saying how Narrow River was one of the best wild resources in Narrow River was sort of also an important point that they wanted to keep that as a good resource for Narrow River. So we've been around for all that time. Presently, we have a board of about 17 people. Plus we have an advisory board of, a lot of them are past board members. We're a very active board. So not only do we have our monthly meetings, which the public is invited to every Tuesday, the first Tuesday of the month, but we have a number of programs that we go. And one is the River Watch program. So Annette DeSilva, who's on the call here, she's been organizing that ever since it started in 1992. And Annette can talk more about that. But that's sort of our signature program that we've been measuring water quality measurements in Narrow River since 1992. So for over 30 years. So we have a very good record of what's going on in the river. We also take involved with current issues. For example, both Jim and Craig have been particularly involved with what's going on with the mouth of Narrow River right now and with the storms going on and working with the town of Narragansett. So we want to stay very current with what is going on. Again, we have a long history of water quality measurements. We also are very active and try to get people involved. Our mission statement now is that we're engaging people to preserve and protect Narrow River. And so we have a number of activities, whether it's What Lives in This River, that's a family event where we can have families come and do seine netting and dip netting and find out what's in the river. Or we have art on the river, and we work with our Native Americans who their ancestors lived in this area to do some art activities or cultural activities. Our website, go take a look at that, narrowriver.org. We got plenty of tons of information. As you can imagine, the organization being around for 50 years, we've been involved with quite a bit. Again, and we're active. Our board members are active, and we are the state designated watershed council for the Narrow River, which means that we're a member of the Rhode Island Rivers Council. And by being the state designated watershed council, that means that we have legal standing. So for example, like I'm a resident of Narragansett, if we're talking about some issue happening in North Kingstown, that I am allowed as a member of an officer of Narrow River Preservation to go attend those North Kingstown meetings as a representative and to be heard. So we have legal standing. We also like to say we're sort of the eyes and ears and keeping an eye on Narrow River for the public.
Very cool. And I think you actually did a really good job explaining my second point there, or my second question. What are the focus points of the organization there? And clearly there's a lot of them, and clearly you guys have some very good standing with the state too, which is very cool to hear. So without further ado, I'd say let's get right into it. My news director, as well as myself, I was telling one of our members here earlier that we did see the Facebook post of the overturning of the water. And of course, it's not something you typically see here in Rhode Island. You're not used to more of those kind of tropical like shades of coloring in the water itself. So I'm just going to ask, can you briefly describe what the recent overturning phenomena was at the mouth of the river or in the upper ponds and lower ponds?
Sure. I'll jump in, but everybody else can jump in. We've been working. This is our most latest overturn, but actually overturns, they're also called ventilations because it's ventilation of the bottom water. That's a scientific term. They're how they happen is, well, the conditions are such that you have a dry fall, which we have definitely had this year, as you know. It's also a time when it's usually in October and November when water temperatures start to cool down, because normally Narrow River is a very stratified system. What I mean by that is that if you do a profile of temperature, salinity, or oxygen from the top to the bottom, you see layers because it's an estuary, and there's fresh water coming. A third of the fresh water comes from Gilbert Stewart Stream, which comes right into Upper Pond. And then the rest come from smaller streams along the way. And then seawater is coming up. It's coming from Rhode Island Sound into the mouth of the Narrow River, and it comes all the way up the river, up to the dam at Gilbert Stewart Birthplace and Museum. So it's an estuary with this 2-layer flow. And normally the top 4 meters, about 12 feet, are just typical estuarine flow. But the 2 deep ponds, the upper and lower pond, are very deep. One's 45 feet deep, that's upper pond, and lower pond is 65 feet deep, or 18 meters and 12 meters for upper pond. Those below about 4 meters or 12 feet, the water is naturally without oxygen because those waters don't mix. The water over geologic time, the oxygen's been used up, and what's the ecosystem that's there is very happy to be in a system without oxygen. And if you don't have oxygen, you usually have sulfur. So these are organisms that live off of sulfur, and they're just happy they're fine down there. But when these overturns happen, and again, it's a dry fall, so there's less fresh water coming into the system, and water temperature starts to cool, so that stratification is breaking down. So the water is could be more easily mixed. But then you have blustery winds, and then I think the trigger this time, of course, you have seawater coming up, and you have more seawater coming up, and because it's more dense, it's dropping to the bottom of these. These ponds are fjord type systems, particularly the upper pond is very much like that, where most of the river is pretty shallow, but then these are very deep holes. And so the seawater comes up and then drops because it's more dense, drops to the bottom, and then pushes up that bottom water, that naturally anoxic bottom water, and that comes up to the surface. And then that's what we see and smell. As that water comes up to the surface, the sulfur in it reacts with the air, and the sulfur precipitates out. And that's why you see this kind of milky color, this turquoisey color, this cloudy color. That's the sulfur precipitating out. And if you look at a bottle of the water, I have some here, you actually don't see too much, but it's that overview of the water. You realize that it's this translucent color.
The light reflecting.
Rotten egg smell, because that's coming from the sulfur that's coming off there.
Gotcha there. Very cool. Thank you for giving us more of that. So how does this kind of relate in terms of specific weather conditions? Because we do typically look after hurricanes for signs of upwelling in the ocean. You can actually see it on a lot of the visible satellite imagery. And I'm sure you could actually see a bit of what's going on in Narrow River too. So what kind of similarities do we have between the movement of water in hurricanes and the lack of movement in water? And are there any really kind of similarities between the two to show why we're seeing this change in Narrow River?
I don't think there's much relation between those two. For example, like after Superstorm Sandy, when we had a ton of water coming up into Narrow River, we did not see an overturn. So it's the overturns that happen seem to be more.
I was going to say, is it more of a delicate process as opposed to kind of a ramped up kind of surge of water in it? Does it have to be like a low stream flow and then kind of you just get a strong tide that kind of seeps under? Is it more like that, or is it more just what are the forcing mechanisms that kind of make it overturn in the first place?
Yeah, it's having a really dry fall, so there's less fresh water coming into the system, and having high tides bringing more salt water into the system, and then having cooler temperatures so that the water can mix, and blustery winds so that the water really does mix.
Okay.
So this weekend we had some very high tides due to the lunar impact from the full moon. And so that probably helped this go at this moment, along with, as Veronica said, the drought and other things that happened. So we had more water coming in. We were at a higher level than we have been in a while on the river other than storms.
Now, what date exactly did the overturn happen? Was it the 14th?
It
I
was
believe.
Saturday, which I think was the 16th.
16th. Okay. Because we were talking about, you probably watched the King Tide Sunday Science segment
Yep.
we ran, but yeah, that lunar tide was maximized back on the 14th. So we were seeing, of course, the King Tide effects a few days through the weekend there. So very interesting. Thank you for kind of providing some more perspective regarding the overturn itself, but just kind of regarding general science with the Narrow River Preservation Association. We're just kind of curious, what data is being collected and what's it being used for, and why is it important to the general public?
Sure. Do you want me to pop in here?
Sure.
So I've been the coordinator for the NRPA River Watch program, and we just finished up our 33rd season. And the parameters we monitor are temperature, dissolved oxygen, chlorophyll, salinity, nutrients, and bacteria. And we sample from 13 locations that span the entire length of the river, starting at Gilbert Stort Stream, going down to Mumford Brook in the Pawtucket Cove area. We sample at Sprague Bridge, and then locations that are kind of evenly spaced and easy, safe to access by the volunteers. And each year we have about 30 volunteers who go out every other week between May and October and take these samples and make the measurements. This year we had 34 volunteers. Not only are they out there taking these measurements, which then they send the data and the samples to URI's Watershed Watch program. URI Watershed Watch program, I'm not sure if you're familiar with their group. They provide the training, the equipment. We support NRPA supports the cost through contributions and grants to support the cost of the River Watch program. The volunteers are just such a dedicated group. Over the course of 33 years, we've had well over 200 volunteers. Many of those individuals have been with the program for many years. In fact, everyone on this call has been a volunteer. Veronica and Craig have been volunteers for many years. I've been with the program since the start. Jim has volunteered. And how the data has been used. Oh, going back to the volunteers. They are our eyes and ears of the river. They not only take the measurements, but they love to share their observations. If they see something unusual, they report back. In the case of the overturn, they were also the noses, because when that overturn happens, there's a rotten egg smell. And so although our monitoring season ended before the overturn, once it happened, it's such a great network to be able to send news about the event to the volunteers and say, if you see anything, and sure enough, some of the volunteers many of them live within the watershed, some right on the water, said, I see the cloudy water seeping into lower ponds. So we're able to keep abreast of things. It's a wonderful group of stewards for the river. In terms of what we monitor the trends, and the program started back in '92 because sewers were being installed along the river. And the towns, North Kingstown, South Kingstown, and Narragansett, were interested in seeing how the sewers were going to impact water quality. And so they provided the seed money to get this program started. They called on NRPA to help initiate the program, and we stuck with it for 33 years. With the sewering, development of the river was increasing at the same time. So some of the things that the sewers certainly helped in terms of water quality, but we had additional pressures from development. And I think one of the things we've seen that's been one of our biggest challenges is stormwater runoff. And as an example, this year's bacteria data that the volunteers collected seemed to mirror the impacts of we had a very, very wet beginning of the season from May to August with a lot of stormwater runoff. And so what we saw were higher levels of bacteria in many of the locations where the river is more densely populated, the southern portion. Then in September and October, when we had very little rain, the bacteria levels went back down because we were having less pressure from stormwater runoff. So over the years, we've watched these issues such as from stormwater runoff. And as a result, some best management practices have been implemented with support from our town and state, and detention ponds have been installed in various neighborhoods along the river. And we hope to really follow up and do more in that area.
That's
Does anybody
great.
else want to add anything? I've been chatting for a long time.
I think that was very good. So of course, the Narrow River, I feel like it kind of sets the precedent for what most river reporting should be. Has anyone kind of followed suit since your long storied history of kind of making sure that people are aware of what the river's like at Narrow River and other places? Have you seen that?
Yeah, there are many other areas in the state that participate in the watershed watch with University of Rhode Island. Last night, actually, there was a meeting in the South Kingstown at the high school library discussing what the town efforts are. And there is the Southeast New England group, Southeast New England program called SNAP that's kind of looking at similar activities throughout Southeast New England to really see. So as Annette said, stormwater is one of our biggest challenges. And they're seeing this bacteria phenomenon elsewhere, like in the salt pond and other areas in South Kingstown, as well as throughout the state. So it's a known phenomenon with just growth. You know, we're becoming more urban in Rhode Island, and that's not a bad thing, but we also hopefully have some ways that we can deal with it better.
So yeah, definitely trying to mitigate all the potential bacteria sources there into the water. Now, aside from the smell, the overturning, the ventilation did make for quite the sight. Are there any negative impacts with an overturn, and have you recorded any of that?
Well, as far as negative impacts to, the last big overturn that we had, and we can kind of go into the history of that, was in 2007. I mean, the last overturn that persisted. We've had overturns since then that have been partial, like it's only been part of a pond, or they've only lasted for a day, so for a short term. But the last one that lasted a long time was 2007, and that lasted for 7 weeks. And actually, if you go on our website, there's a PowerPoint called "What's That Smell?" that we put together after sampling all that. So one of the things was that overturn, which happened in October, so earlier in the season, we saw a lot of dead fish. Now, we didn't see any. One person saw one dead striped bass in Lower Pond, but that's the only report we've had. And I've been out there every day. I haven't seen anything. I think, having talked to fishermen, because this is in November, that striped bass who overwinter in Narrow River in the ponds and the deep ponds, they just, when they started to smell, they went. Yeah. So they left. And the thing that we had in October was that the alewives alewives are migratory fish, and they spend most of their life out in the seawater, and they come up the river, Narrow River, and up into Gilbert Stewart Stream, and then they spawn in the pond at Gilbert Stewart, birthplace and museum. Those juveniles head downstream in October. So in that 2007 overturn, we had a lot of smaller fish that died because they just couldn't swim fast enough and get out of there. We're not seeing that. The other thing that we've seen is blue crabs. There are a lot of blue crabs in Narrow River, including in the ponds, on the shores of the ponds. They, when these overturns happen, we find them that they will try to get out of the water because the sulfur is not good for their shells or for them. And so what they will do is come out of the water and burrow themselves in the sand so that they stay moist, but they're out of the sulfur. And I've been looking for that. I haven't seen that yet, but one of our members saw that happening up at the beach at King Benson Preserve yesterday. And after this call, I'm actually going to go up there and check that out. So I think the blue crabs are there. Also, any benthic organisms, by benthic organisms, I mean organisms that are living like right on the sediment in the water, they have probably died because they just can't deal with the sulfur and they can't get out of there fast enough. But anything that was like the bacteria, the phytoplankton, and the things that are living deep in the water that have been adapted to the sulfur, they're fine. We do have David Borkman. He has been taking samples for phytoplankton, and phytoplankton are the microscopic organisms that are living in the water column, throughout the water column of Narrow River and any marine estuarine place. And he has been counting and identifying, and he's seeing some different species that are coming. There's species that are more adapted to low oxygen conditions. So we're seeing a shift in the phytoplankton. That will probably be a temporary shift, just as long as the overturn is going on.
Great. Well, thank you for answering that regarding any potential negative impacts. It doesn't seem like there's any besides that nasty smell. What we do know that's negatively impacted is our climate. And of course, we're seeing more extreme precipitation events, more dry spells. We had the wettest winter, the second wettest winter, followed by the second wettest spring, followed by the 19th wettest summer, followed by the second driest fall we're in right now. So, I mean, we're seeing both ends of the spectrum. And of course, you're dead. Yeah. Then that's exactly the definition of it in the first place. But just kind of regarding, it seems like we have a well-seasoned crew here by no means. What have we seen what have you all seen within your time working with the Narrow River in terms of changes to some of the data you've collected? And that could be to anyone.
So one of the big things, which I think everyone's seeing, is temperatures. So average temperatures are going up. And so, like you said, we have the peaks and valleys, of course, but temperature in general are trending up, which is well documented throughout the world, right? You know, that's nothing new. But with that comes then different bacteria or algae or other things are going to grow differently. And then that just goes right through the food chain, whether it's the bacteria that ultimately feed some lower forms of life and then the fish eat that. That may affect these types of fish. And it's well documented, as I'm sure, I think you covered this weekend, with what's going on in the bay, too. Different species of fish are coming in now, things like that.
So, Jim, the other thing that I would add to that is that we have had a pronounced decline in eelgrass beds in the lower river over the past 8 years or so. And while we don't have a clear correlation, it's quite possible that that might be related to an increase in water temperatures. And also, it's very well documented that in Narragansett Bay, as well as Narrow River, even more so, our salt marshes fringing Narrow River are struggling to keep up with current rates of sea level rise. And that is a really huge problem, and one that concerns us greatly, because if you lose your salt marshes, you lose tremendous ecosystem services that estuaries provide.
I think that's a great point there, Craig, as the sensitivities to some of these marine estuaries is a lot more kind of robust than it is for what us humans experience on land. Like we don't feel the impacts of climate change day in and day out, but those communities are being impacted on more of a larger scale, and sometimes can be detrimental. So that's very interesting to hear. Just one last question before we go. I think we've been speaking about this a good amount anyways, but what aims does the association have for the future? I'll let anyone who's willing to talk, but I appreciate you all chiming in.
Oh, sure. Well, we want to continue to be an advocate for Narrow River. Continuing like this, like keeping an eye on current events and what's happening, and being having a response to that. We think it's very important also to have our responses being able to back it up with scientific data, and to have a
long-standing record of observation.
Right. So what science between our River Watch program, also I've been doing a water quality for the ponds ever since that last overturn in 2007. So we have a record. We know what's been going on since then. We're able to look at different parameters such as the eelgrasses, and we have hired experts to come and work with us to give us more expertise on that. So NRPA, we've hired experts for different areas, and we want to continue to do that. So, of course, that takes money, and so we're always looking for our membership to expand. But we also want to keep all our members really, we want to let you know what's going on in Narrow River and keep you current with that.
I think in addition, we obviously are focused on the natural habitat and ensuring that we can do the best of that, but it's also a great recreation area. A lot of our residents and people come visit the Narrow River for all the things like kayaking, canoeing, and even, motorboating and so on. So we want to make sure that that stays with us. And with that, we need a healthy estuary in order for all that to happen, for the reasons why people come here to enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely tourism, a major part of that. You can continue, Greg.
Yeah, I just wanted to return to one thing that may have gotten lost in the discussion, and just how unique Narrow River is with this assemblage of species that's sulfur-based. It's highly unusual, and Veronica, maybe you can speak to this, but it's my understanding that this assemblage of species is really not found in the continental U.S., and the closest analogy are fjords in Sweden and Norway. Is that true?
Yeah, speaking to what Craig said, yes, we are a very unique ecosystem in Narrow River, which official name is Pawtucket Estuary, because in addition, particularly with these deep ponds, people come from all over the world to study these. I've had people come this summer from Woods Hole Institution, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, people from California that do work in New England. And just last Friday, we had a researcher who's down in New Jersey who came up here, and she's interested in Narrow River because we have magnetobacteria, which is sort of a cool thing. We have bacteria here that have iron oxides in them that actually act like magnets. And this is one of the few places in the world that has that. So that's why she wants to come up from New Jersey and study this. And she's working on a proposal with NASA because they're interested in habitable worlds. So there's very unique ecosystems here. And we have, over the course of this year, we've had overturns have happened here. I was just checking 1957, 1971, 1980, 1990, and 2007. And the reason we know those happened at those dates was because there were researchers that were out there taking samples, and because they had other projects going on. Where our proximity to the Graduate School of Oceanography and main campus of URI means that we're a great place for a lot of people to come and do research. And so there's tons of studies going on here over the time because they're such unique ecosystems. And so whether they're looking at these deep ponds or whether they're looking at water quality in the rest of the river, people do come from all over the world to study these because it is a very unique ecosystem.
That's very cool to hear. And of course, I think we got the Fantastic Four here kind of assembled to put everything forward. I think this will be some great PR for the NRPA and all the work you guys do. So I greatly appreciate you guys taking the time